Hi. Welcome back to another episode of Horror Talker. These are some crazy stories which truckers have shared claiming to have happened to them. Are you ready? Let's start with some exclusive set of stories. I've driven these roads for longer than I care to remember. The endless stretches of highway, the quiet solitude of the open road, it's become a part of me. But what I encountered on that fateful cross-country journey still sends shivers down my spine, and I can't explain it, even now. It was a moonless night, and the interstate stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the void. The radio crackled with static, the signal fading in and out, but I paid it no mind. I'd heard stranger things on the airwaves. As I pushed the rig forward, my eyelids grew heavy, and I felt the weight of fatigue settle over me like a shroud. I decided it was time for a break and pulled into a dimly lit rest stop nestled between two looming hills. The air was thick with an eerie stillness that seemed to seep into my bones. I climbed out of the cab and stretched my legs, my boots crunching on the gravel. The rest stop was deserted, not a soul in sight. I shrugged off the unease that had settled over me, chalking it up to the late hour. I stepped into the small building that served as a rest area, and the bell above the door chimed softly as I entered. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, wavering shadows on the tiled floor. The place had seen better days. I approached the vending machine and inserted some change, the clinking of coins echoing in the emptiness. As I reached for a candy bar, I felt a sudden chill, a presence in the room that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them, two figures standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. My skin prickled as I realized they hadn't been there a moment ago. They were dressed in tattered, hooded cloaks that concealed their faces, and they stood perfectly still, like statues. I couldn't see their features, but I could feel their eyes on me, a palpable, malevolent presence that sent a wave of dread coursing through me. I backed away, my heart racing, every instinct in my body screaming at me to flee from those shrouded figures. My footsteps were slow and cautious, each one echoing loudly in the eerie silence of the rest stop. The cold sweat on my brow felt like icy fingers tracing a chilling warning on my skin. My breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps, and I dared not look back, not even for a moment. The dread in my chest was suffocating, a visceral fear that clawed at my sanity. Every nerve in my body seemed to be on edge, every hair on my neck standing at attention. As I finally reached the safety of my truck, I fumbled for the door handle, my trembling fingers struggling to find purchase. But even as I sped away, my eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that those figures were still there, watching me, their eyes burning into my soul with an intensity that defied reason. The rearview mirror reflected nothing but the empty parking lot of the rest stop, but I knew better than to trust my eyes. They had been there, lurking in the shadows, and I couldn't escape the haunting conviction that they were now following me, their malevolent presence a relentless specter in the darkness. Every glance in the side mirrors, every shadowy figure on the roadside, sent a jolt of terror coursing through my veins. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being pursued, that the rest stop encounter had marked me in some unfathomable way, and that I was now a target in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The road stretched on, and I tried to put the encounter out of my mind, telling myself it was just a trick of the light or a bout of exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But the unease lingered, like a shadow that refused to be dispelled. The radio continued to crackle and hiss, and as I tuned the dial, I stumbled upon a broadcast that sent a chill down my spine. It was a voice that sounded like no voice I'd ever heard before. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, a strange, guttural tongue that made my skin crawl. I tried to change the station, but the voice persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if it was reaching out to me, beckoning me into its strange, otherworldly realm. I turned the radio off in frustration, but the voice still echoed in my mind, a haunting presence that refused to be silenced. The road stretched on, the miles passing in a blur, but the sense of unease that had settled over me refused to dissipate. I began to notice strange things, figures standing on the side of the road, watching me as I passed, their eyes gleaming in the headlights. I stopped at another rest stop, hoping to shake the feeling of being pursued, but the figures were there again, standing in the shadows, their hooded faces turned toward me. I couldn't make out their features, but I could feel their eyes on me, a silent, malevolent presence that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to confront them, to demand answers, but they vanished into the darkness as I approached, leaving only the echo of their eerie laughter in the air. I climbed back into the cab, my hands trembling, and hit the gas, desperate to put distance between myself and those haunting figures. But no matter how fast I drove, they seemed to be right behind me, always on the periphery of my vision. The road became a nightmare, a twisting, endless maze of shadows and uncertainty. The voices on the radio grew louder, their words incomprehensible, their tones filled with malice. I had to get away, had to escape this nightmare, but the road stretched on, unending, a highway to nowhere. As the hours passed, I began to lose all sense of time and place. The world outside the truck seemed to blur and warp, as if I had entered a different dimension, a realm of darkness and despair. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The figures, the voices, the eerie phenomena, all of it vanished, leaving me alone on the empty highway. I pulled over and sat in the cab, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. What had I experienced? What had I seen? I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't find a rational explanation. I continued my journey, the road stretching out before me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that I had crossed a threshold into a world beyond my understanding. The rest of the trip passed in a blur, and when I finally reached my destination, I felt a profound sense of relief. But the memory of that night still haunts me, a mystery that will never be solved, a darkness that lingers on the highway of my mind. It was one of those long, lonely nights on the road, the kind where the world feels empty, and the only company you have is the hum of your engine and the flicker of your headlights. I'd been driving for hours, and the fuel gauge on my rig was inching perilously close to empty. My heart sank as I scanned the desolate highway, knowing that finding a fuel stop in the middle of nowhere was a daunting task. But just when I was about to resign myself to the inevitable, a dimly lit sign emerged from the darkness, promising salvation, Scott's fuel stop, 1 mile ahead. It was a beacon of hope on this isolated stretch of highway, and I eagerly followed the arrow on the sign. As I pulled into the parking lot, I couldn't help but notice the eerie stillness that hung in the air. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The fuel pumps were rusty and creaky, and the overhead lights buzzed and flickered sporadically. I climbed out of the cab, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and approached the fuel pumps cautiously. The cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, unsettling sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I swiped my credit card and began to refuel, the familiar sound of gasoline gushing into the tank providing some small comfort. But as I stood there, gazing around the dimly lit fuel stop, a sense of unease began to gnaw at me. I noticed strange symbols etched into the walls of the building, symbols that seemed out of place in this remote location. They were crude, almost ritualistic, and they sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't make heads or tails of them, but they filled me with an inexplicable dread. The eerie noises from the nearby woods grew louder, a discordant cacophony of rustling leaves and distant, echoing footsteps. I strained my eyes in the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of what could be causing the commotion, but I saw nothing. My unease deepened, and I decided it was time to finish refueling and get back on the road. But just as I was about to hang up the fuel nozzle, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a voice, soft and distant, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. I turned toward the source of the sound, and that's when I saw them, figures emerging from the woods, their forms shrouded in darkness. They moved slowly, deliberately, and as they drew closer, I could see the strange, tattered garments they wore. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized that I was not alone at this abandoned fuel stop, that I had stumbled upon something I couldn't explain. Panic welled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control now. I retreated to the safety of my truck and locked the doors, my eyes fixed on the figures as they approached the fuel pumps. They moved with an eerie, synchronized grace, their movements almost mechanical. I considered calling the police, but I knew that in this remote location, help would be slow to arrive. I had to figure out what was happening here on my own. As the figures reached the fuel pumps, they began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, their voices low and guttural. It was a haunting, otherworldly sound that sent shivers down my spine. I watched in horror as they produced strange, ornate knives from their robes and began to etch more symbols onto the walls of the building. The symbols glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, casting twisted, shifting shadows on the ground. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, and I realized that I had to do something, had to find a way out of this nightmare. I reached for my cell phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation to the operator. But just as I was about to hang up, the call was abruptly cut off, replaced by a deafening burst of static. I stared at the phone in horror, realizing that I had no way of calling for help. Desperation gripped me, and I knew that I had to escape, had to get away from this nightmarish fuel stop. I considered driving through the figures, but something told me that would only make matters worse. I glanced around the cab, searching for a weapon, anything that could help me defend myself. My eyes landed on a tire iron lying on the floor, and I grabbed it, my fingers trembling with fear. I took a deep breath and opened the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to confront these figures, had to find out what they wanted and put an end to whatever dark ritual they were performing. I stepped out of the truck and approached the fuel pumps, my tire iron at the ready. The figures turned toward me, their eyes empty and soulless, and I could see that their mouths were stained with blood. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and I realized that I had to act quickly. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged at the nearest figure, swinging the tire iron with all my strength. The impact sent the figure sprawling, and it let out a blood-curdling scream that chilled me to the bone. The others turned and advanced toward me, their movements slow and deliberate. I fought with everything I had, swinging the tire iron again and again, but it was like trying to fight a nightmare. The figures seemed impervious to pain, and they kept coming, their chanting growing louder and more frenzied. I was running out of options, running out of strength, and I knew that I couldn't hold them off much longer. But just as I was about to succumb to despair, I heard the sound of approaching sirens, the flashing lights of police cars cutting through the darkness. The figures scattered, disappearing into the woods as the police arrived, their weapons drawn. I collapsed to the ground, my tire iron slipping from my grasp, my heart still pounding with fear. As the police took my statement, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, a sense of escape from the nightmare that had engulfed me. But as I watched them search the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over, that the truth behind the abandoned fuel stop was a mystery that would never be fully revealed. I climbed back into my truck and drove away, leaving the flashing lights of the police cars behind me. The road stretched out before me, empty and desolate, and as I continued on my journey, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the highway held, what other nightmares lurked in the darkness, waiting to be uncovered. I've hauled all sorts of cargo in my time as a trucker, from the mundane to the bizarre, but nothing could have prepared me for the job I took that fateful night. It was a call that came in the dead of night, a voice on the other end that spoke in hushed tones. "John," the voice said, "we've got a special delivery for you. You're to pick up a cargo at the Riverside warehouse and transport it to an undisclosed location. No questions asked, no inspections, and absolutely no communication with anyone during the journey. The cargo is sensitive, and the less you know, the better." The instructions were clear, the voice authoritative. I was given a set of coordinates for the pickup and a deadline for delivery, 24 hours to transport this mysterious cargo to its destination. The pay was too tempting to pass up, and I accepted the job without hesitation. I arrived at the Riverside warehouse just before dawn. The place had an air of abandonment about it, with cracked windows and graffiti-covered walls. A solitary figure, dressed in a dark suit, awaited me at the loading bay. "John," the figure said, his voice low and measured, "you're here for the cargo. It's in the container by the far wall." I nodded and made my way to the container, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the warehouse. The cargo was a large, nondescript crate, sealed tightly with heavy-duty locks. It looked like any other cargo I'd transported, but the instructions I'd been given weighed heavily on my mind. I loaded the crate onto my trailer and secured it in place. As I climbed back into the cab of my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. What was in that crate, and why was it so sensitive that I couldn't even inspect it? The journey began, and with each passing mile, my paranoia grew. I couldn't help but glance at the crate in my rearview mirror, wondering what secrets it held. The road was quiet, the darkness outside the only witness to my mounting apprehension. The first strange occurrence happened about an hour into the journey. I noticed a sharp drop in temperature inside the cab of the truck, even though the night had been warm. I checked the thermostat, but it read a steady 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I tried to dismiss it as a mere glitch, but then I heard it, a faint, eerie sound coming from the direction of the cargo. It was a soft, almost imperceptible hum, like the distant rumble of thunder on the horizon. I glanced at the crate in the rearview mirror, but it gave no indication of its source. The hum persisted, growing louder and more unsettling with each passing minute. It was as if the cargo itself was alive, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. I tried to focus on the road, to put the strange occurrences out of my mind, but the feeling of unease continued to gnaw at me. It was as if I was being watched, as if unseen eyes were fixed on me from the shadows. As the hours passed, the hum of the cargo grew louder, its vibrations resonating through the trailer. I couldn't ignore it any longer, I had to know what was inside that crate. I pulled the truck to the side of the road and climbed out, my heart pounding in my chest. I approached the cargo with trepidation, my hand trembling as I reached for the locks. But as I touched the locks, a voice echoed in my mind, the voice of the mysterious caller from the night before. "No inspections," it said, the words a chilling reminder of the consequences I faced if I defied the instructions. I stepped back from the cargo, my mind racing. I couldn't risk losing the job, but the sense of foreboding had become overwhelming. I had to continue the journey, to deliver the cargo to its destination and be rid of it once and for all. As I climbed back into the cab and resumed the journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every shadow, every passing car, seemed like a potential threat, a silent observer of my clandestine cargo. The hum of the cargo grew louder, its vibrations rattling the trailer. It was as if the crate was alive, pulsing with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I tried to drown out the sound with the radio, but even the music couldn't quell the growing sense of dread. I drove through the night, my paranoia intensifying with each passing mile. The road stretched out before me, endless and unforgiving, and I couldn't help but wonder what kind of secrets this cargo held. What kind of danger was I unwittingly transporting? The first rays of dawn began to break on the horizon, and I knew that I was running out of time. The coordinates for the delivery point were fast approaching, and I had to find out what was in that crate before it was too late. I pulled the truck to the side of the road once again, my determination overriding my fear. I approached the cargo, my heart pounding, and reached for the locks. As I opened the crate, a blinding light spilled out, illuminating the interior of the trailer. I shielded my eyes from the glare, and when I finally looked inside, my heart stopped. The cargo was not what I had expected. It was a large, cylindrical chamber, filled with a translucent, gel-like substance. Suspended in the gel were countless small, humanoid figures, their bodies frozen in a state of suspended animation. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Who were these figures, and why were they being transported in such a bizarre and secretive manner? The hum of the cargo grew deafening, drowning out all other sounds. As I stared at the figures, their eyes snapped open, and they began to move, their limbs twitching and contorting in the gel. Panic gripped me, and I stumbled back from the crate, my mind reeling. But then, a voice echoed in my mind, the voice of the mysterious caller. "You were never meant to know," it said, the words a chilling reminder of the consequences I faced for defying the instructions. I climbed back into the cab of the truck and slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I had seen too much, had uncovered a secret too dangerous to comprehend. As I continued the journey, the sense of foreboding weighed heavily on me. The figures in the cargo remained frozen in their gel-like prison, their eyes staring out at me with an otherworldly intensity. I knew that I had to deliver the cargo to its destination, to rid myself of this nightmarish burden. The very thought of it sent shivers down my spine, a chilling realization that I was now entangled in something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. But the road stretched on, endless and unforgiving, like a malevolent force of its own, conspiring to keep me locked in this terrifying web. As the miles passed beneath my tires, my paranoia intensified. Every shadow cast by the moonlight seemed to hold hidden dangers, every rustling tree on the roadside whispered of ominous secrets. The hum of the cargo in the trailer resonated through the truck, as if it was mocking my desperation, taunting me with the knowledge that I was now complicit in a conspiracy beyond my control. I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching my every move, that I was being monitored, tested, by forces I couldn't comprehend. The very air around me felt heavy with spite, and the darkness outside was like a shroud, concealing the horrors that lurked in the shadows. As I finally reached the coordinates for the delivery point, I pulled the truck to a stop and climbed out, my legs trembling with exhaustion. The sense of relief was palpable, but it was tinged with a deep unease. I watched as a group of shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, their faces hidden beneath hooded cloaks. They approached the cargo with a reverence that sent shivers down my spine. The figures didn't acknowledge me, didn't speak a word. They simply began to unload the cargo, their movements slow and deliberate. As the last figure disappeared into the shadows with the cargo, I knew that my part in this nightmarish journey was over. I climbed back into the cab of the truck, my hands trembling, and drove away from the delivery point, leaving behind a mystery I would never fully understand. The road stretched out before me, endless and unforgiving, and as I continued my journey, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the darkness, what other horrors lurked in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. The clock on my dashboard read 2:34 a.m. as I drove down the desolate stretch of highway that cut through the heart of rural Pennsylvania. My girlfriend, Emily, sat beside me, her presence a comforting anchor in the lonely darkness. The road was shrouded in mystery, illuminated only by the faint glow of my headlights, and the world beyond seemed to disappear into an inky abyss. We had been on the road for hours, a monotonous journey through the quiet countryside. The occasional farmhouse or dimly lit gas station passed by, but for the most part, we were alone with our thoughts, the radio providing the only respite from the solitude. The music had long since faded into the background, a comforting backdrop to the solitude of the night. That's when I first noticed it, a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, distant but unmistakably following us. At first, I dismissed it as a fellow traveler on this lonely highway, but something about the other vehicle's presence sent a shiver down my spine. The driver of the vehicle behind us seemed relentless, maintaining a constant distance that was neither too close nor too far. It was as if they were studying us, gauging our every move. I couldn't make out the make or model of the car, only the menacing glare of its headlights in my rearview mirror. My heart began to race, and I tried to shake off the unease that was settling in. Maybe it was just a coincidence, I thought, my imagination running wild in the solitude of the night. But as the miles passed and the other driver showed no signs of turning off, my anxiety grew. I decided to test my theory. I slowed down, allowing the gap between us to widen, but the other driver matched my speed, never falling behind. I tried speeding up, pushing my car to its limits, but still, they kept pace, their headlights a constant presence in my mirror. Emily looked at me with a mixture of concern and fear. "What's going on? Why won't they leave us alone?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. "But we need to figure this out." My rational mind urged me to find a logical explanation, to believe that it was just another traveler heading in the same direction. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The other driver's intentions remained shrouded in mystery, and their relentless pursuit was anything but ordinary. As the minutes turned into hours, our anxiety turned into full-blown panic. We had no cell signal to call for help, and the next town was miles away. The highway stretched on, seemingly endless, and the isolation of the night pressed in on us like a vice. I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a case of road rage, I thought, someone with a grudge against a stranger on the highway. But road rage didn't explain the calculated persistence of the pursuit, the way the other driver seemed to anticipate our every move. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The call went through, and I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher, my voice quivering with fear. I gave them our location and a description of the vehicle tailing us, hoping that help would arrive soon. But as I spoke to the dispatcher, a sense of dread washed over me. The other driver had begun to change tactics. They no longer stayed at a constant distance, instead, they would speed up and fall back, their headlights disappearing for moments before reappearing behind us. Each time their headlights blinked out, it felt like a heartbeat skipped, a nauseating pause before the terror of their presence returned. We were trapped in a nightmarish cycle of pursuit, our every attempt to elude them met with their relentless determination to close in on us. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles white with fear, as I navigated the lonely highway, desperately trying to outmaneuver our tormentor. The tension in the car was palpable, a suffocating fear that threatened to consume us. Every glance in the rearview mirror revealed nothing but the haunting glow of their headlights, an ever-present reminder of the terror that pursued us. It was as if they were toying with us, reveling in our fear and helplessness. I relayed this to the dispatcher, my voice desperate, but there was little they could do until the police could reach us. As the miles passed, our anxiety gave way to a growing terror. The other driver's behavior had become increasingly menacing, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted, that we had unwittingly become prey on this desolate stretch of highway. Emily spotted a sign up ahead, indicating the next exit was only a few miles away. Maybe, just maybe, we could lose our pursuer in the maze of back roads and side streets. I relayed my plan to the dispatcher, who urged us to drive to the nearest police station if we could make it there. As we approached the exit, I signaled to make our turn, my heart pounding in my chest. The other driver followed suit, never once breaking their pursuit. Panic gripped me as I navigated the dark, winding roads of the exit, the other vehicle hot on our tail. The road twisted and turned, and I pushed my car to its limits, my tires screeching around corners. The other driver kept pace, their presence like a malevolent shadow. It was as if they knew these backroads as well as I did, anticipating our every move. I realized that we were in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, and the stakes were our very lives. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, urging us to stay on the line, to keep driving, but I could hardly hear their words over the sound of our racing hearts. The pursuit continued, a relentless dance of fear and desperation. I took every turn I could, trying to shake our pursuer, but they remained on our tail, their headlights a constant threat in my rearview mirror. As the minutes turned into hours, Emily and I felt like trapped animals, our options dwindling with every mile. The dispatcher assured us that help was on the way, but we knew that we couldn't rely on their arrival alone. We had to find a way to escape this nightmare. Finally, I spotted a glimmer of hope, a small police station up ahead, its parking lot empty and dark. With renewed determination, I sped towards it, praying that we could make it to safety. I pulled into the parking lot, my tires screeching to a stop, and I could see the other vehicle approaching behind us. Emily and I threw open our doors and sprinted towards the police station, banging on the door and shouting for help. The dispatcher could hear our frantic pleas and assured us that officers were en route. We could see the other driver getting out of their car, their figure silhouetted by the dim light of the station. We pounded on the door, our hearts in our throats, and then, just as the other driver was about to reach us, the police station's lights flickered to life, and the door swung open. Officers rushed out, their guns drawn, and the other driver was apprehended. Emily and I collapsed to the ground, tears of relief streaming down our faces, as the police handcuffed the person who had terrorized us for hours. The nightmare was finally over, and we were safe. As the adrenaline subsided and we spoke to the police about what had happened, we couldn't help but wonder about the motives of our pursuer. What had driven them to relentlessly chase us on that lonely highway? The questions remained unanswered, and the encounter would haunt us for years to come. But one thing was certain, we had survived a nightmarish ordeal, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse on a desolate stretch of highway. The memory of those haunting headlights in our rearview mirror would forever be etched in our minds, a reminder of the terrors that can lurk in the darkness of the open road. It was one of those restless summer nights when neither of us could sleep. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I lay in bed, our minds wandering, when a spontaneous idea took hold. "Let's go on a road trip," she whispered, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The notion of a spontaneous adventure appealed to me, and before we knew it, we were packing an overnight bag, filling the gas tank, and hitting the open road. Our destination? Nowhere in particular, just a journey into the unknown. Hours passed as we drove through winding roads and picturesque landscapes. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the countryside grew desolate, and the glow of civilization faded into the rearview mirror. We were alone on a lonely highway, surrounded by the darkness of the night. That's when we spotted it, a flickering neon sign in the distance, casting an eerie glow against the night sky. "The Desert Rose Motel," I read aloud from the sign. "Should we check it out?" Sarah grinned, her sense of adventure matched only by her curiosity. "Why not? It could be fun." We pulled into the motel's parking lot, gravel crunching beneath our tires. The Desert Rose Motel was a relic of a bygone era, its paint peeling, and its neon sign flickering sporadically. It looked like it hadn't seen a guest in years. A weathered sign at the entrance advertised vacancies, and we decided to take a chance. As we approached the front desk, an old man with tired eyes and a faded uniform greeted us. "Room for two?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yes," I replied, handing over some cash. "Just for the night." The old man handed us a tarnished key and pointed down the dimly lit hallway. "Room 7. Enjoy your stay." Room 7 was a time capsule from the 70s, complete with gaudy wallpaper and shag carpeting. But for a night's stay, it had a certain charm. We settled in, and despite the motel's run-down appearance, we found ourselves strangely comfortable. As the hours passed, we began to hear strange noises, an occasional creak from the floor above, whispers in the hallway, and the distant hum of a television. I dismissed it as the quirks of an old building, but Sarah's unease was palpable. "Relax," I told her, trying to ease her fears. "It's just an old motel." As the night wore on, the motel seemed to come alive with sinister whispers and eerie sounds that crept through the cracks in the walls. The once faint murmurs in the hallway intensified, morphing into indistinct conversations that sent shivers down our spines. It was as though unseen guests were holding clandestine meetings just beyond our door, their hushed tones filled with an inexplicable malevolence. The flickering lights, which had once seemed like a minor inconvenience, now cast grotesque and elongated shadows on the walls. Each stuttering burst of illumination revealed distorted shapes that danced menacingly around the room, their grotesque forms seemingly mocking our presence. An unsettling feeling settled over us, like an invisible shroud of dread that tightened with every passing minute. The air grew heavy with an unexplained presence, and the very atmosphere seemed charged with an otherworldly terror. The initial excitement of exploring this forgotten place had given way to a bone-deep fear, and the urge to flee the motel's unsettling grip grew stronger with every passing moment. "Maybe we should leave," Sarah suggested, her voice quivering. I hesitated, torn between our unease and the adventure of spending a night in a place with a history all its own. "Let's just give it a little more time," I replied. As we lay in bed, the strangeness of the motel continued to reveal itself. The television in the adjacent room blared, but it was tuned to static, a white noise that filled the air with an unsettling presence. I thought about knocking on the neighboring door to ask them to turn it down, but something held me back. Just as I was about to doze off, I heard a faint tapping on our window. My heart raced as I sat up, my eyes locking onto the curtain. Sarah clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like someone desperately trying to get our attention. I mustered the courage to pull back the curtain, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, on the other side of the glass, was a young woman, her face contorted in anguish. She mouthed words that we couldn't hear, her eyes pleading for help. It was as if she were trapped in some kind of silent torment. I flung open the window, and she stepped back, her eyes never leaving mine. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She shook her head, her lips forming the word "danger" before pointing towards the motel's entrance. I turned to see a group of shadowy figures emerging from the darkness, their intent unclear but undeniably menacing. Panic surged through me as I grabbed Sarah's hand, and together, we made a run for it. We left our belongings behind, sprinting down the dimly lit hallway, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind us. We burst through the motel's front door and into the cool night air, our hearts pounding with fear. The old man at the front desk was nowhere to be seen, and the neon sign overhead continued to flicker. We didn't stop until we were back in our car, the engine roaring to life. As we sped away from the Desert Rose Motel, the shadowy figures remained in the distance, their menacing presence fading into the night. We drove for miles, not stopping until we reached a well-lit gas station where we finally felt safe. The night had been a harrowing experience, one that had tested our relationship and left us with more questions than answers. What had happened at the Desert Rose Motel? Who were those shadowy figures, and why had the young woman sought our help? The motel's dark history remained a mystery, but one thing was certain: we had narrowly escaped a nightmarish encounter that we would never forget. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, we continued our journey, putting the Desert Rose Motel and its eerie inhabitants behind us. The open road stretched out before us, and though the events of that night would haunt us for years to come, we were grateful to be moving forward, together, into the light of a new day. It was one of those restless summer nights when the idea of spontaneity beckons like a siren's call. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow on the empty streets as my girlfriend, Lisa, and I decided to embark on a late-night road trip. Our destination: uncharted territory, the promise of adventure lurking in the unknown. As we drove through the lonely highways, the world seemed to blur into a sea of darkness and endless possibilities. The radio played our favorite tunes, and the soft hum of the engine provided the soundtrack to our journey into the night. Our laughter filled the car, as we shared dreams, aspirations, and the thrill of the open road. But as the hours passed, the signs of civilization grew scarce, and the comforting glow of city lights faded into oblivion. We found ourselves surrounded by an inky void, the night's silence broken only by the sound of our tires against the pavement. That's when we saw it, a weathered billboard, barely visible in the moonlight, advertising an abandoned roadside attraction. Mystery Town, a world of wonders, it proclaimed, accompanied by faded images of peculiar exhibits and peculiarities that seemed frozen in time. Lisa pointed at the sign, her curiosity piqued. Should we check it out? The idea of exploring an abandoned attraction in the middle of nowhere held an undeniable allure. We pulled off the highway and onto a narrow, overgrown road that led to our destination. As we approached, the attraction came into view, and it was unlike anything we had ever seen. Mystery Town was a testament to a bygone era, its entrance gate adorned with ornate ironwork, now rusted and decayed. The ticket booth was boarded up, its windows shattered by time and neglect. The entrance gate creaked open, as if inviting us into its forgotten world. We ventured inside, the atmosphere thick with a sense of eerie nostalgia. Faded banners and tattered flags fluttered in the breeze, their colors long lost to the ravages of time. Abandoned ticket booths and empty food stalls stood as silent witnesses to a time when this place had been filled with life. As we explored the attraction, we came across a series of exhibits that sent shivers down our spines. There were bizarre dioramas depicting cryptids, mythical creatures, and unexplained phenomena. Oddities from around the world were displayed in dusty glass cases, their stories untold but lurking in the corners of our imagination. The deeper we ventured into the heart of Mystery Town, the more the atmosphere seemed to thicken with an unrelenting sense of dread. Each step forward felt like a descent into an abyss of terror, and the very air seemed to pulse with malevolence. Unexplained noises echoed through the night air, each sound more disconcerting than the last. Muffled footsteps, like distant echoes of long-forgotten visitors, reverberated through the empty corridors. We strained to identify the source of the sounds but found nothing, adding to our growing unease. Strange shadows lurked in the corners of our vision, defying the logic of the dimly lit attraction. Lisa clung to my arm, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and trepidation. "This place gives me the creeps," she admitted. I nodded in agreement, my own unease growing with every step. The exhibits became increasingly surreal, as if we had stepped into a parallel world where the line between reality and fiction blurred. But the true terror began when we stumbled upon the Hall of Mirrors, a maze of reflective surfaces that twisted our perceptions and seemed to stretch on forever. We lost ourselves in the labyrinth, our voices echoing off countless reflections of our own fear-stricken faces. As we struggled to find our way out, the mirrors seemed to warp and distort our images, making it impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, disoriented by the relentless maze of glass. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we stumbled out of the Hall of Mirrors and back into the moonlit night. We were shaken, our nerves frayed, but relieved to have escaped the claustrophobic nightmare of the maze. As we tried to regain our composure, we heard a faint sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the shadows. We turned to see a pair of glowing eyes, staring at us from the darkness. We backed away slowly, our hearts pounding, as the eyes followed our every move. It was then that we noticed the other figures emerging from the shadows, strange, misshapen creatures with twisted limbs and grotesque features. Panic surged through us as we turned and ran, our pursuit by the mysterious inhabitants of Mystery Town driving us deeper into the labyrinthine attraction. The twisted dioramas and eerie exhibits seemed to come to life, their grotesque inhabitants animated by some unseen force. With each passing moment, the line between reality and nightmare blurred further, and we struggled to maintain our grasp on sanity. Our relationship, once a source of strength, was now tested to its limits as we fought to survive the horrors that surrounded us. The night seemed endless, as we were relentlessly pursued by the sinister inhabitants of Mystery Town. Unexplainable events continued to unfold, each one more terrifying than the last. It became clear that we were not the first to fall victim to this nightmarish attraction. But we refused to become part of its dark history. With sheer determination and a desperate will to survive, we navigated the horrors of Mystery Town, using our wits and the remnants of our courage to outwit our pursuers. As the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, we reached the attraction's entrance gate, our breathless escape a testament to our resilience. We stumbled back onto the highway, leaving Mystery Town and its malevolent inhabitants behind. The events of that night would haunt us forever, a nightmarish descent into the unknown that tested our relationship and our ability to confront the darkest corners of our own fears. Mystery Town remained a sinister enigma, a place of horrors that defied explanation, and we were grateful to have escaped its clutches. As we drove away from the abandoned attraction, the rising sun bathed the world in a soft, golden light. We had emerged from the darkness into the light of a new day, forever changed by the horrors we had witnessed but determined to face the future together, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. It was one of those nights when the world seemed to belong solely to me and the endless stretch of highway that cut through the American heartland. The clock on my dashboard read well past midnight, and fatigue weighed heavily on my shoulders. But there was still a long way to go, and I was determined to reach my destination. As the headlights of my car pierced the darkness, I spotted a sign up ahead, announcing the presence of a town that had never appeared on any map I'd seen before. "Welcome to Ashen Hollow," it read, but there was something peculiar about it. The letters seemed faded, as though they hadn't been touched by human hands in years. Curiosity piqued, I turned off the highway and onto a winding road that led deeper into this forgotten town. The streetlights lining the main street flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that danced in the corners of my vision. It was as though Ashen Hollow itself was reluctant to reveal its secrets. The buildings that lined the main street were relics of another era, their facades worn by time and neglect. The windows were boarded up, and the doors were sealed shut with heavy chains and padlocks. It was a ghost town frozen in time, a place that had been abandoned long ago. I pulled up to a gas station on the edge of town, hoping to refuel and maybe grab a cup of coffee to shake off the weariness that clung to me. But as I stepped out of my car and approached the pumps, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The gas station was eerily empty, devoid of any signs of life. I checked the convenience store attached to the station, but the shelves were bare, the cash registers empty. It was as though the town had been abandoned in the middle of business as usual, as if the residents had simply vanished into thin air. Unease settled in the pit of my stomach as I walked back to my car, the engine idling uneasily. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I scanned the desolate streets, but there was no one in sight. Determined to unravel the mystery of Ashen Hollow, I continued to explore the town, each step leading me deeper into its unsettling past. I passed by homes that were locked up tight, their curtains drawn, as if their occupants had left in a hurry. Abandoned cars sat in driveways, covered in layers of dust and neglect. As I ventured further into the town, I began to notice unsettling details about its history. Faded murals on the sides of buildings depicted scenes of violence and despair, and newspaper clippings that littered the streets hinted at a dark and tragic past. My heart raced as I scanned the dimly lit interior of my car, the soft glow of the dashboard casting an eerie pallor on my face. One headline on the car's infotainment screen caught my attention: "Mass disappearance baffles Ashen Hollow." My fingers trembled as I tapped on the screen to read the article, my curiosity mingled with a growing sense of dread. The article detailed the sudden and inexplicable vanishing of the town's residents, leaving behind only their personal belongings and a sense of eerie emptiness that hung over Ashen Hollow like a shroud. No explanation had ever been found, no clues or leads to follow. The town had become a place of urban legend, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to speak of it at all. My mind raced, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized the uncanny parallel between the article's description and my current predicament. The highway, too, had a sense of eerie emptiness about it, as though the very essence of life had been sucked from its asphalt veins. My exploration led me to an old library, its doors standing ajar as if inviting me inside. The shelves were lined with dusty books and tattered manuscripts, all dedicated to the history of Ashen Hollow. I began to piece together the fragments of the town's past, each revelation more chilling than the last. Ashen Hollow had once been a thriving community, known for its close-knit residents and its idyllic charm. But a darkness had descended upon the town, a darkness that had torn families apart and driven people to madness. It was said that the town had become cursed, that something malevolent had taken hold of its soul. As I delved deeper into the town's history, I couldn't help but feel that I was retracing the steps of those who had vanished before me. The sensation of being watched grew stronger, as if the town itself resented my presence and sought to drive me away. I had to know the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. I followed the trail of clues to a decaying mansion at the edge of town, its once grand facade now a crumbling testament to its former glory. It was here that I hoped to find answers, to uncover the secrets that Ashen Hollow had hidden for so long. As I entered the mansion, a chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was not alone. The air was heavy with a malevolent presence, and the rooms were filled with the echoes of whispered conversations that seemed to come from nowhere. I climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The hallways were lined with portraits of former residents, their eyes following me as I passed. Each face seemed to wear a mask of torment, a reflection of the darkness that had consumed Ashen Hollow. In the final room at the end of the hallway, I discovered a diary that belonged to the mansion's former owner, a man named Samuel Hawthorne. His words revealed a descent into madness, a descent fueled by an unspeakable evil that had taken root in the town. Hawthorne had conducted dark experiments in the basement of the mansion, experiments that sought to unlock the secrets of the afterlife. It was a reckless pursuit of power that had unleashed a malevolent force, a force that had driven the town's residents to madness and ultimately led to their mass disappearance. I knew then that I had to leave Ashen Hollow, that the town's dark history was a weight too heavy to bear. But as I made my way back to my car, I couldn't escape the feeling that the eyes of the town were upon me, that Ashen Hollow resented my intrusion and sought to keep its secrets hidden. I sped away from the town, the eerie streets disappearing in my rearview mirror. The mysteries of Ashen Hollow would remain unsolved, its secrets buried in the past. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a haunting reminder that some places are best left unexplored, and that there are dark corners of the world where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blur, and the unknown waits to claim those who dare to venture too close. It was a moonless night when I found myself driving along a desolate stretch of highway, surrounded by an ocean of darkness. The relentless hum of my engine was the only company I had on this long, solitary journey. Hours of driving had taken their toll, and I decided to pull into a remote rest stop to stretch my legs and take a break from the monotonous road. The rest stop seemed ordinary at first glance, a few dimly lit parking spaces, a weathered sign marking the facilities, and the distant glow of highway lights. As I parked my car and stepped out into the brisk night air, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that this place was different from the usual rest stops I had encountered on my travels. I headed towards the small building that housed the restrooms, a sense of unease creeping over me. The flickering overhead lights cast long, distorted shadows on the pavement, and the air was thick with an unsettling silence. Inside, the restroom was dimly lit, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The tiled walls were covered in layers of graffiti, a chaotic collage of names, crude drawings, and cryptic messages. I chose an empty stall, feeling a chill run down my spine as I noticed the unsettling graffiti etched into the door. "Beware the whispers in the night," one message read, its words scratched into the metal with an almost desperate urgency. Another message simply stated, "Turn back now, stranger." My unease deepened, and I couldn't help but wonder who had left these ominous warnings and what they meant. As I was lost in thought, I heard a faint whisper, a soft, almost inaudible voice that seemed to come from nowhere. I strained to listen, my heart racing, but the words were indecipherable, like a conversation taking place in a distant room. I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, a product of my weariness. Leaving the restroom, I encountered a man standing near the vending machines in the rest stop's dimly lit lobby. He was of average height, dressed in a long, dark coat that seemed out of place in the warm night. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, and he exuded an air of mystery that was hard to ignore. I approached the vending machines, feeling the weight of the stranger's gaze on me. He spoke in a low, raspy voice, his words measured and deliberate. "You're traveling through the night, aren't you?" he asked, his tone laced with an unsettling familiarity. I nodded, suddenly on edge. "Yeah, just trying to make some miles." The stranger's lips curled into a knowing smile, revealing a set of yellowed teeth. "You know, the night holds its own secrets," he said cryptically. "Darkness has a way of revealing the hidden truths that remain concealed in the light." His words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. I decided to make a hasty exit and return to my car, eager to put some distance between myself and this enigmatic stranger. As I settled back into the driver's seat, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every move. The night had grown colder, and the air felt heavy with an oppressive presence that seemed to seep into my very soul. I decided to listen to some music, hoping to drown out the sense of unease that had settled over me. But as I turned on the car radio, the speakers emitted a series of discordant, static-filled noises that sent a jolt of fear through me. It was as though the very airwaves themselves had become tainted by the sinister atmosphere of the rest stop. I quickly turned off the radio, my heart pounding, and glanced at my phone to check the time. It was then that I noticed something unsettling. The screen displayed a series of numbers and letters that made no sense, a cryptic code that seemed to defy explanation. The sense of claustrophobia and dread intensified with every passing second, squeezing my chest in a vice-like grip. The rest stop, once a fleeting refuge from the lonely highway, had transformed into a suffocating nightmare, where the ordinary boundaries of reality no longer held sway. It was as though the very air had thickened with malevolence, and I was trapped within its oppressive embrace. Every flicker of the overhead lights sent shivers down my spine, casting elongated and sinister shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on the walls. It was a silence that seemed to stretch on forever, punctuated by the echoing footsteps of unseen visitors. The walls felt like they were closing in, the ceiling descending to meet the floor, and the very ground beneath my feet seemed to shift and writhe with unseen malice. I stumbled back from the restroom door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and made my way to the exit. As I got into my car and pulled away from the rest stop, the sense of dread still clung to me like a second skin. As I turned the key in the ignition, the engine refused to start. Panic surged through me as I tried again and again, but the car remained stubbornly silent. It was as though the very machinery had succumbed to the malevolent influence of the rest stop. I was trapped, a prisoner in this desolate place, with no means of escape. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. The restroom graffiti and the stranger's cryptic words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had stumbled into something beyond my comprehension. I considered seeking help from the rest stop's small office, but the idea of returning to that dimly lit building filled me with dread. The restroom's graffiti had taken on a sinister significance, and the whispering voices that had haunted me there still echoed in my memory. As I sat in my immobilized car, the sense of being watched grew stronger, as though unseen eyes were closing in on me. The rest stop had become a suffocating prison, a place where reality itself had fractured, and the boundaries between the known and the unknown had blurred into a nightmarish tapestry of fear. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity, and the night seemed to stretch on without end. I had become a reluctant resident of this sinister rest stop, a captive audience to its malevolent mysteries. Just when I had resigned myself to my fate, a faint glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, a pale, pre-dawn glow that promised the end of this waking nightmare. With a final, desperate turn of the key, my car roared to life, and I sped away from the rest stop, leaving it behind in the rearview mirror. The sense of dread and unease clung to me like a shadow, but I was free from the rest stop's suffocating grip. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder about the secrets that lay hidden within that desolate place, secrets that defied explanation and left an indelible mark on my soul. The night had been a descent into the unknown, a journey into the heart of fear itself, and the memory of that forsaken rest stop would haunt me for the rest of my days. Some places are best left unexplored, their mysteries left to the darkness, and I had learned that lesson the hard way on that fateful night. It had been a long and tiresome journey, one that had begun with the setting sun and now stretched deep into the inky blackness of the night. I found myself driving on an unfamiliar highway, a seemingly endless stretch of road that defied explanation. The minutes turned into hours, and the hours turned into a seemingly endless night, but no matter how far I drove, there was no sign of an exit, no glimpse of civilization on the horizon. The highway was like a nightmarish labyrinth, its twists and turns leading me further into an unknown abyss. I couldn't even recall how I had ended up on this desolate road, its asphalt seemingly untouched by the passage of time. Panic gnawed at the edges of my consciousness as I desperately searched for any sign of escape. The radio in my car had long ceased to provide solace, its broadcasts transformed into a disturbing symphony of static and disjointed voices. Words and phrases that made no sense tumbled from the speakers, a cacophony of confusion that added to my growing sense of unease. I reached for my phone, hoping to rely on its GPS for guidance, but it too had succumbed to the eerie malaise that had enveloped the highway. The screen displayed a blank, featureless expanse of darkness, as though the very device itself had lost its way in this nightmarish realm. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, both physical and mental, as I continued to navigate the never-ending highway. The relentless monotony of the road was broken only by the occasional flicker of distant headlights, like ghostly beacons in the night. But as I tried to approach them, they always seemed to recede, slipping away like elusive specters. The sense of isolation was suffocating, and the paranoia that had taken hold of me grew with each passing mile. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move from the shadows beyond the reach of my headlights. My thoughts turned to the possibility of an accident or a breakdown, but I couldn't bring myself to stop on this forsaken highway. The fear of becoming trapped in this never-ending loop was a powerful motivator, and I pressed on, my grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. As the night wore on, I tried to rationalize my predicament, to find a logical explanation for the highway's unending nature. Perhaps I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, or maybe there was a malfunction in the road signage. But the complete absence of any markers, signs, or exits defied all reason. The radio continued to broadcast its disjointed messages, and I strained to make sense of the voices that emerged from the static. They spoke of things I couldn't comprehend, of places that didn't exist, of events that defied the laws of nature, and of a highway that led to nowhere. It was as though the very airwaves themselves had been contaminated by the malevolent influence of this desolate road. Exhaustion began to take its toll, and my eyelids grew heavy with weariness. The relentless monotony of the highway seemed to stretch on infinitely, and my thoughts became disjointed and fragmented. I couldn't remember where I had started this journey or even where I was headed. It was as though the highway had erased all traces of my previous life, leaving me adrift in a nightmarish limbo. As I continued to drive, the line between wakefulness and dream blurred, and I couldn't discern whether I was truly awake or trapped in some twisted nightmare. The highway had become a prison, an unyielding loop from which there was no escape. I tried to call for help, dialing 911 on my phone in a desperate bid to escape this endless nightmare. But the call wouldn't connect, and a dissonant voice on the other end of the line uttered cryptic warnings and nonsensical phrases. The terror that had taken hold of me reached its peak, and I could feel my sanity slipping away like grains of sand through my fingers. The highway had become a nightmarish purgatory, a place where the laws of reality no longer applied, and I was its unwilling prisoner. As I drove deeper into the heart of this endless highway, a sense of claustrophobia and dread closed in around me. The darkness outside my car was suffocating, an inky void that seemed to swallow the world whole. I strained my eyes to pierce the night, but there was no horizon, no point of reference, only an unending expanse of obscurity. I fumbled for the car's interior light, hoping to find some solace in its feeble glow. But when I flicked the switch, the light remained stubbornly dim, casting eerie shadows that danced on the periphery of my vision. It was as though the very darkness had seeped inside the car, infecting its very essence. With each passing mile, the fear that had taken hold of me grew more potent, more oppressive. The highway was like a never-ending tunnel of despair, and I was its solitary traveler, lost in the abyss. The world outside my car had become a malevolent void, a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was teetering on the precipice of some unspeakable horror, that the darkness outside held secrets too dreadful to contemplate. The highway had become a living nightmare, fear and uncertainty reigned supreme. My breath quickened, and my hands trembled on the steering wheel as I continued to drive through this nightmarish void. I was no longer sure if I was driving through the night or if the night was driving through me, consuming me with its unending emptiness. The highway had become an inescapable loop, a Mobius strip of despair from which there was no return. And as the hours turned into an eternity, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever find my way back to the world I had known, if I would ever escape this never-ending highway and the relentless nightmare it had become. The highway had become my reality, my prison, my tormentor, and I was its captive, lost in a night that had no end. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. Until next time, stay awake and stay alert, because you never know.